Donald Trump has made a series of remarks this Wednesday about Ukraine and about Volodymyr Zelensky that have left many observers almost speechless. Trump called Zelensky a dictator without elections, and earlier Trump said Ukraine shouldn't have started the war. The remarks appear to show an ignorance over the situation in Ukraine, where elections were postponed because of the war. A war, we remind you, started when Vladimir Putin, Russia's authoritarian president, who is of course wanted by the International Criminal Court, launched an all-out invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago, next Monday. Well, let's hear some of Volodymyr Zelensky's replies to Donald Trump's outrageous and some would say egregious claims.
We have seen this disinformation. We understand that it comes from Russia. We understand that. And we have evidence that these numbers are being discussed between America and Russia. So unfortunately, President Trump, who we have great respect for as the leader of the American people, whom we respect very much, who supports us constantly, unfortunately lives in this disinformation space.
Volodymyr Zelensky speaking a little earlier. Let's go straight to Kyiv to get reaction. Gulliver Cragg, our correspondent there. Gulliver, good evening. I've got to start by asking you what you think of Donald Trump's words.
Well, it's not important what I think, but what's important is to make sure that we get our facts straight, because a lot of the things that Donald Trump has been saying are just plainly untrue. Calling Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator is not something that anybody in Ukraine does, even his really staunchest opponents. Nobody calls him a dictator. Most Ukrainians agree that it's not possible to hold elections at this time and that doing so might destabilize the country and be very logistically difficult. Donald Trump also said that Volodymyr Zelensky's popularity rating was 4%. It's between 42 and 57%, according to the most recent surveys that I've seen in any case. Donald Trump also said this is getting petty and insignificant, but let's note it as well that Volodymyr Zelensky is a moderately successful comedian, or was before he became president. By any measure, you cannot call Volodymyr Zelensky moderately successful. He was absolutely one of the most important figures in Ukrainian entertainment history. You might not think he's very funny, you might not think his films are very good, but you cannot deny that he was extremely successful in his previous career. Then there are these claims about US support for Ukraine. According to Volodymyr Zelensky, and I believe the Ukrainians could quite easily produce the documentation to prove it and will do in short order, Donald Trump is claiming that the United States have given Ukraine more aid than they really have, also claiming that the Ukrainians can't account for how it was spent. They absolutely can. All of these things were set out quite clearly in this press conference by Volodymyr Zelensky today, which I think means that his popularity ratings probably shot up this evening, actually, because people are rallying around their president. Even people who are normally very critical of him are saying that Donald Trump's claims are absolutely unacceptable, and also because he was calm, as we heard there, remaining diplomatic, expressing his respect for the American people, whilst clearly stating that he could not agree with these things that Donald Trump was saying. So he really rose to the occasion with that press conference earlier today.
Give us more of a sense, Gulliver, of what ordinary Ukrainians are saying about all of this.
I mean, people are aghast. They're really, really disappointed. Some of them are really surprised. 44% of Ukrainians back in December said they supported Donald Trump and thought that he could bring peace on favourable terms for Ukraine. A far higher percentage than the percentage in Western Europe who believed the same. They are feeling insulted. I mean, people who've lost families or been displaced from their homes. This is another thing that Donald Trump said in one of his recent speeches, comparing Ukraine to Gaza, saying that vast swathes of the country have been absolutely razed to the ground. It's not like Gaza. Cities like Mariupol and Bakhmut have been completely destroyed. Yes, hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced, but Ukraine is a huge country. Most of its housing stock is absolutely intact. Claiming that it's just a land of ruins is also just completely inaccurate and insulting to the people who have suffered. And people are just they just can't believe it, I think. I think Ukrainians really had a lot of respect for the United States, thought of the United States as an ally. The prospect of now having to think of the United States as an adversary is absolutely horrifying for them. Then there are disagreements. I've seen, people really laying into those Ukrainian Americans who voted for Trump, and there are a surprisingly large number of them saying, how could you have been so naive? People having that kind of bickering online, and then lots and lots of speculation about what this is going to mean going forward. But the main reaction I've heard talking to anybody who's close to the military effort, whether it's soldiers or volunteers who are helping the army that I've been speaking to in recent days, all of them are saying we're going to carry on fighting. There's no peace that Donald Trump with the Russians can impose on us that we're going to accept. I don't know if you went deeper into public opinion, further away from big cities, further away from people who are directly connected to the war effort, if you might not find some people who would disagree with that, but I haven't found any so far. Everyone I've spoken to in any case says that Ukraine is not going to accept some kind of peace being dictated to them and will carry on fighting for as long as it can.
Indeed, even people with just a passing knowledge of what is going on, and not with your depth of knowledge on the subject, would know that Ukraine didn't start the war, and that the amount that Trump is quoting as being spent is nothing like the figure that has been put together by all those observing the money that has been spent on the war in Ukraine, the donations by the US, almost matched by Europe. Gulliver, any thoughts on Trump's motivation for saying what he said?
Well, what it looks like is that Trump, in concert with Putin, it has to be said, seems to be in favour of getting rid of Volodymyr Zelensky, ousting him. Whether he's been convinced by the Russians of this unpopularity, of all of this stuff, maybe he's been duped by the Russians, or maybe they know exactly what they're doing and they're in cahoots, but in a way that's irrelevant. It does very much look like both the Russians and the Americans want Ukraine to hold elections, and in such a way as to get rid of Volodymyr Zelensky. Why they think, the Russians, that that's going to deliver a good outcome for them, I'm not sure. And that's a topic of a lot of speculation here in Ukraine this evening, because the top candidates who might replace Volodymyr Zelensky if there were free and fair democratic elections held without major Russian interference or some kind of, dirty work going on behind the scenes, they're all people who are even more, if it's possible, staunchly opposed to Vladimir Putin than Volodymyr Zelensky is.
Gulliver Cragg in Kyiv, as always, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in Keravan Gorjestani, our